Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. So if you watched my 2018 wrap-up 2019 goals video, in that video I talked about how I basically abandoned my spreadsheet and I didn't crunch any of the numbers for my reading for last year. And I also mentioned in that video how the only numbers I really cared about were my genre breakdown numbers, only because I've been tracking that information since 2012, or I might even have data from earlier than 2012. And so it's always interesting to me to see sort of how my reading changes from year to year, what my focuses are, things like that. So I finally decided to just sit down and crunch the numbers, at least for genre, just so that way I have the data. And one of the things that I saw in the data, but I could also tell when thinking about my reading in 2018, is that the number of science fiction and fantasy books in terms of percentages was down last year. And that is partially because of me hosting the Read or Dead podcast. I have to read more mysteries than I would have before. And so obviously that had an impact on the rest of my reading. And so I feel like the genre that took the biggest hit was, besides literary fiction, was my science fiction and fantasy reading. Now I will say I tend to read more fantasy than science fiction, but science fiction has been also a thing that I'm starting to explore a lot more. Last year, I feel like especially I started to pick up or gravitate towards science fiction books, partially in an effort to figure out which ones work for me, because I knew it was a genre that I could enjoy, but it was just finding the right science fiction books to work for me. And then also just continuing to read fantasy books that work for me as well, because not every book in every genre will work for you, but it's about finding the ones that do have the elements that you really enjoy in stories. So in an effort to balance the scales a little bit, I suppose, I don't know how else to phrase it, but to just increase my science fiction and fantasy reading, I thought I would talk a little bit about which 2019 science fiction and fantasy releases that I am really excited for. I usually don't do most anticipated lists because there are often just too many different books that I'm really excited about. But I thought I could just focus in on the science fiction and fantasy books that I've heard about so far that are coming out this year that I'm really excited about, to help me just prioritize those books a little bit more in this year. So this video is also a paid promotion with Disney Book Group in conjunction with the new release of Dragon Pearl by Yoon Ha Lee. Now, this is a book that I legitimately had on my most anticipated list prior to them contacting me for this video. Yoon Ha Lee is an author who I've heard such amazing things about, and I've been wanting to read Nine Fox Gambit and that series of books for a long time, but I was also very scared of reading those books because I've heard it's very hard science and there's some very heady topics that are talked about in that series. I'm intimidated by those books, to be completely honest. And so I got really excited when I found out that Yoon Ha Lee was writing a middle grade story under the Rick Riordan imprint, because that meant that it was going to be slightly more accessible and someone like me could get into the story. So this is a middle grade novel based on Korean folklore, and you are following 13-year-old Min, whose brother has recently joined the Space Forces. Now, Min and his family come from a long line of fox spirits. They are shapeshifters, but their mother insists that they must never show their shape-shifting powers. They have to appear as humans at all times. The story starts off with an officer coming to their home and informing them that June, Min's brother, has left his post and he's suspected of searching out the Dragon Pearl, which is supposed to be this object of immense power. But Min knows that June would never abandon his post, and so she knows that something is actually wrong, and she decides to run away and try to figure it out, and this book is basically her adventure. So yeah, I've already started reading this book actually, and I'm really enjoying it a whole lot. It's really fun, and like I said, if you are someone who doesn't read a lot of science fiction books, I feel like that this is a really great place to start, or in general, middle grade young adult science fiction is a really great entry point for non-science fiction readers. So yes, Dragon Pearl by Yoon Ha Lee is definitely on my most anticipated list, whether they were sponsoring this video or not. A fantasy book that is sort of all the buzz in the literary world is A Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. Marlon James wrote the book A Brief History of Seven Killings, which won the Man Booker Prize and, was beloved by everyone. And so now he is writing a fantasy series that is basically being pitched as an African Game of Thrones, but I think that's just sort of publishing marketing shorthand for a fantasy series taking place in Africa. So in this story, you are following this character named Tracker, who is a well-known hunter. He gets hired to track down a boy who went missing around 3 years ago, and he ends up breaking his own rule about working alone because he gets pulled into a group of people who are looking for this boy. However, as this group moves forward in trying to find this boy, they consistently are getting attacked and trying to get stopped, and it has Tracker wondering what exactly is going on here and who this boy is. This book sounds like it is going to be like Game of Thrones in that it's very dense and there is a lot of story going on here, but this sounds like a really great fantasy book that you can just like really dive into and fall into the world. And I am sure that Marlon James has written something just completely amazing here, so I'm super excited to pick this one up. This one comes out in early February. I got very lucky and was sent an advance copy of it, and yes, I'm super excited for this one. All right, a science fiction suspense thriller type book that I am excited to pick up is Vessels by Lisa A. Nichols. So in this one, you are following this astronaut named Catherine Wells, whose ship experiences this massive incident and she ends up losing contact with NASA, and so everyone assumes that she and her crew are dead. However, she's survived, but with little memory as to what has happened. And so she's re-entering Earth after a decade away. And obviously a lot of things have changed in her life back home. Her husband has moved on and is now with someone else. Her daughter, who she left behind, is now a teenager. And obviously Catherine's been extremely affected by these events too. And she has these episodes where she wakes up in increasingly strange and worrisome locations like restricted areas of NASA. And so now she's really wondering what's going on here, like what happened while she was out in space with her crew, how was she like able to survive the event, and what is happening to her now that she's back on Earth. So this is one of those books that I think will be a good science fiction book for people like me who don't read a ton of science fiction, because it's a science fiction thriller, and obviously you guys are aware I read plenty of mysteries and thrillers, and so that's a genre that I enjoy, and so this one has like a slight science fiction edge to it. All right, and then the final book that I have to talk about in this video is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. My girl has a new book out and I am excited. So anyone who's been watching my channel for a while knows I love Silvia Moreno Garcia. She wrote one of my all-time favorite books, Signals to Noise, and she is out with a new fantasy book. This one takes place in the Jazz Age and is inspired by Mexican folklore, which is super cool. So you are following this character named Cassiopeia, who basically spends all of her days sweeping her wealthy grandfather's mansion, and she dreams of being able to leave her small Mexican town. But then one day she finds a curious wooden box in her grandfather's house. She opens it and accidentally frees the spirit of the Mayan god of death, and it requests her help in trying to reclaim the throne taken by its brother. Failure means Cassiopeia's demise, but if she succeeds, all of her dreams could come true. So this one doesn't come out until August, which is, you know, very sad for people like me who are very excited for this book. But I always love a good science fiction or fantasy book that takes mythologies from other cultures, other non-Western cultures, or, you know, non-European cultures, and plays upon them and tells these new and interesting stories. And the fact that it's set during the 1920s Jazz Age is really fantastic as well. So I'm really excited to see what Silvia Moreno Garcia does this time. I feel like all of her books are really different from each other in terms of like setting and story, but she always writes really interesting, really complicated characters, which is something that I super love. So yes, Gods of Jade and Shadow is definitely one I'm going to be picking up this year for sure. So that is everything I have for this video. Leave a comment down below letting me know what science fiction or fantasy books that you are super excited about, or ones that you think that I would enjoy based on what you know about my reading tastes. You know, character-driven stories more than anything else is always what I'm drawn to. Or if you just have good recommendations for science fiction books for people like me who don't read a lot of science fiction, but they do enjoy some science fiction, always appreciate recommendations like that. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.